The harsh desert sun bore down on the dusty streets of Bodie, California, as Sarah Miller stood trembling on the wooden auction platform, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Her once fine dress, now tattered and stained from weeks of hard travel, hung limply around her slender frame. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd, his words slicing through her like knives as he called for opening bids on the fine young woman before them. Sarah had never imagined her life would come to this. 3 weeks ago, she had been traveling west with her uncle, her only living relative, when their stagecoach was attacked. Her uncle was killed, and she was captured by a gang of outlaws who, upon discovering she had no money or family to ransom her to, decided to sell her to recoup their losses. $5. Do I hear 10? The auctioneer called, his voice carrying across the crowd of rough-looking men who had gathered for the illegal human auction on the outskirts of Bodie. The mining town, known for its lawlessness and violence, seemed to have no shortage of men willing to buy a woman. $10. Someone shouted. 15. 20. Sarah closed her eyes, unable to bear looking at the faces of those bidding on her life, her future, her very body. She was 20 years old, and until 3 weeks ago she had been on her way to San Francisco to take a position as a schoolteacher. Now she was being sold like cattle. $50. A voice called out, silencing the crowd momentarily. It was a deep voice, rich with authority. Sarah opened her eyes, searching for its owner. At the back of the crowd stood a tall man in a black Stetson, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his hat. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but even from a distance, Sarah could see he carried himself differently from the others, straight-backed and steady. $50 from the gentleman in the back, the auctioneer called, clearly pleased with the sudden jump in price. Do I hear 60? 60, called another man, a portly miner with a red face and greedy eyes. 75, countered the man in the black hat, his voice level and calm. The bidding continued, climbing higher and higher until it reached $150, a small fortune in 1875. The crowd had thinned to just 2 bidders, the man in the black hat and a well-dressed businessman who Sarah recognized as the owner of the largest saloon in Bodie, a man known for his cruelty to the women who worked for him. 175, the saloon owner said, a smirk playing across his face. There was a pause, and Sarah felt her heart sink. The man in the black hat was hesitating. Perhaps he had reached his limit. Then his voice cut through the murmuring crowd. $200. The saloon owner's face darkened with anger. He opened his mouth as if to counter, then closed it again, shaking his head in defeat. $200 was more than most miners in Bodie made in 6 months. Sold, the auctioneer cried, banging his gavel with finality. To the gentleman in the black hat for $200. Sarah felt her knees weaken as relief and fear battled within her. She had been sold, but at least not to the saloon owner whose reputation was known even to a newcomer like her. The man in the black hat approached the platform, and as he got closer, Sarah could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were a striking blue, standing out against his sun-darkened skin. There was a scar running along his left cheekbone, but it did nothing to detract from his handsome features. The outlaw who had brought Sarah to the auction shoved her forward. "She's all yours, mister." "Pleasure doing business." The man in the black hat ignored him, instead looking directly at Sarah. His eyes were not filled with the hunger or cruelty she had seen in the other bidders. Instead, they seemed kind. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "my name is Wyatt Forrester. If you'll come with me, please." Sarah had no choice but to follow him as he led her through the crowd. Some men clapped him on the back. Others made crude comments that made her cheeks burn with shame. Wyatt ignored them all, guiding her to where a magnificent chestnut stallion was hitched outside a nearby saloon. "Can you ride?" he asked, his voice softer now that they were away from the crowd. Sarah nodded, though in truth she had limited experience with horses. "Yes, sir." "Good." He untied the horse and effortlessly swung himself into the saddle, then extended his hand down to her. "We've got a ways to go before nightfall." Hesitantly, Sarah took his hand and allowed him to pull her up behind him. She was acutely aware of his strength as he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. "Hold on," he instructed, and Sarah reluctantly placed her hands on his waist. They rode in silence through the town, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was he taking her to some isolated cabin? What would he expect of her? She had been sold, after all. She was his property now. As they reached the edge of town, Wyatt suddenly turned the horse off the main trail and into a small grove of cottonwood trees. Sarah's heart pounded with fear. Was this where it would happen? But Wyatt simply dismounted and helped her down. Then, to her utter shock, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small pouch, which he handed to her. "There's $50 in there," he said. "It should be enough to get you to wherever you're heading." Sarah stared at him in confusion, the pouch heavy in her hand. I don't understand." Wyatt sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm setting you free, miss. No one should be bought and sold like merchandise. I only bid because I couldn't stand by and watch what was happening to you." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. You spent $200 just to set me free." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Well, I wasn't planning on spending quite that much, but that saloon owner was mighty determined. You're worth it, though. Every person's freedom is worth more than any amount of money." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not fear or despair. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Forrester." "Wyatt, please." He replaced his hat. "And there's no need for thanks. Now, where were you headed before all this happened?" "San Francisco," Sarah replied. "I was going to be a schoolteacher." Wyatt nodded thoughtfully. "San Francisco's a good 300 miles from here. Not a journey you should make alone, especially with those outlaws still around." He seemed to consider something for a moment. "I've got a small ranch about 20 miles south of here. My sister lives there too. You're welcome to stay with us until we can arrange safer passage to San Francisco for you." Sarah hesitated. She had just escaped being owned by one man. Should she trust another so quickly? But something in Wyatt's honest blue eyes made her believe him. Besides, what choice did she have? She was alone in a dangerous land with only $50 to her name. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'd be grateful for a safe place to stay." Wyatt smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his rugged face. "Good. We should get going then. Daylight's wasting." As they rode south from Bodie, Sarah held onto Wyatt's waist, feeling safer than she had in weeks. She didn't know what the future held, but for now, she was free, all because a kind-hearted cowboy couldn't bear to see her sold. The journey to Wyatt's ranch took several hours, during which Sarah learned a little about her rescuer. He spoke sparingly, but answered her questions without hesitation. He had come to California during the gold rush of '49 with his father and younger sister, when he was just 12 years old. They had found enough gold to buy a modest ranch, where Wyatt raised horses and cattle. His father had passed away 3 years ago, leaving the ranch to Wyatt and his sister, Abigail. "Abby's about your age," he told Sarah as they rode through a picturesque valley. She'll be happy to have another woman around. Gets lonely for her out there sometimes. Does she help you run the ranch? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Wyatt chuckled. Abby, she practically runs it herself. Better with the books than I am, and the horses love her. She keeps me in line, that's for sure. As the sun began to set, they crested a small hill, and Sarah gasped at the view below. A cozy ranch house sat in a green valley, surrounded by fenced pastures where horses grazed. A small barn and several outbuildings completed the picture. It wasn't grand, but to Sarah's eyes, it looked like paradise after the horrors of the past weeks. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's home, Wyatt replied simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. As they approached, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the setting sun. When she recognized Wyatt, she waved enthusiastically, then looked confused at the sight of Sarah riding behind him. Wyatt Forrester, what have you done now? She called as they drew closer, her tone somewhere between amusement and exasperation. Wyatt dismounted and helped Sarah down. Abby, this is Miss Sarah Miller. She'll be staying with us for a while. Sarah, my sister, Abigail. Abigail's sharp eyes took in Sarah's disheveled appearance, but her smile was warm and welcoming. Any friend of Wyatt's is welcome here. Come inside. You look exhausted. She shot her brother a look that clearly said she expected a full explanation later. The inside of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts that gave it a homey feel. Abigail immediately set about preparing a hot meal while Wyatt took care of his horse. The bathroom's through there if you'd like to wash up, Abigail told Sarah, pointing to a door off the main room. And I'll find you some clean clothes. You look about my size. Sarah nearly cried at the prospect of a proper wash. In the small bathroom, she found a copper tub and, to her delight, it was already half filled with water. Abigail must have been in the midst of her evening routine when they arrived. I'll heat more water, Abigail said, appearing at the door with an armful of clothes. You take your time. Dinner won't be ready for a bit yet. True to her word, Abigail brought several buckets of heated water, and soon Sarah was soaking in the first proper bath she'd had since the stagecoach attack. As she washed away the grime and fear of the past weeks, she couldn't help but marvel at the turn her fortune had taken in just one day. By the time she emerged, dressed in Abigail's borrowed clothes, a simple blue dress that was a touch too large but clean and whole, Wyatt had returned from the barn. He looked up as she entered the kitchen, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes before he quickly glanced away. Feel better? Abigail asked, setting a steaming pot of stew on the table. Like a new woman, Sarah replied gratefully. Thank you both. I don't know what I would have done without your kindness. During dinner, at Abigail's insistence, Sarah shared her story, how she had lost her parents to influenza 2 years ago, how her uncle had offered to take her west where teachers were in demand, and how their journey had ended in tragedy. She faltered when she reached the part about the auction, but Wyatt quietly filled in the details for his sister, whose expression grew increasingly outraged. Those animals, Abigail muttered when he finished. Selling a human being in this day and age. Sheriff Holden should be told about this. Already planning on it, Wyatt assured her. I'm riding into town tomorrow to file a report, though I doubt they'll catch those outlaws. They're likely long gone by now. And that awful auction, Abigail continued, indignant, right outside of Bodie, as if it were perfectly legal. I'm glad you were there, Wyatt. Sarah looked at her rescuer with newfound appreciation. How did you happen to be there at just the right time? Wyatt's expression darkened slightly. I was in town buying supplies. Heard some men talking about an auction at the old Franklin place. Something didn't sit right about how they were discussing it, so I decided to see what was happening. He met Sarah's gaze directly. I've seen slave auctions before, back east before the war. Never thought I'd see something like that again, especially not here. A silence fell over the table, broken only when Abigail stood to clear the dishes. Well, what matters is that Sarah is safe now, and she'll stay here as long as she needs to. Later that night, as Sarah lay in the comfortable guest bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, she found herself thinking of Wyatt Forrester's blue eyes and the way they had flashed with righteous anger at the auction. She had never met a man who would spend such a sum to help a stranger, expecting nothing in return. Just before sleep claimed her, she realized that for the first time since the stagecoach attack, she felt truly safe. The following days established a comfortable routine. Sarah insisted on helping with chores around the ranch to earn her keep. Though she had little experience with ranch life, she was a quick learner and eager to be useful. Abigail taught her to collect eggs from the chickens, tend the vegetable garden, and help with cooking and cleaning. Wyatt rode into town as promised and returned with news that the sheriff had sent telegrams to neighboring communities about the outlaws, but held little hope of catching them. He also brought back a letter from the school board in San Francisco, informing Sarah that due to her failure to arrive by the agreed-upon date, they had hired someone else for the teaching position. "I'm so sorry," Wyatt said, handing her the letter. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and pink. Abigail had gone to visit a neighboring ranch where a new foal had been born. Sarah folded the letter carefully, surprised to find she wasn't as disappointed as she expected to be. "It's all right. There will be other teaching positions. You still want to go to San Francisco?" Wyatt asked, his voice casual as he whittled a small piece of wood with his pocket knife. Sarah considered the question. "I'm not sure anymore. I've grown quite fond of it here." She glanced at him. "If it's not an imposition, I'd like to stay a bit longer, at least until I decide what to do next." Something like relief passed over Wyatt's face. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like. Abby enjoys having you here, and you've been a real help with the chores." "Just Abby?" Sarah asked before she could stop herself, then blushed at her own boldness. Wyatt's hand stilled on his whittling, and he looked at her directly. "No, not just Abby." His voice was low and serious. "I enjoy having you here too, Sarah." The way he said her name sent a pleasant shiver through her. They sat in companionable silence as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself increasingly drawn to Wyatt. She admired his quiet strength, his kindness to his sister and their ranch hands, and the gentle way he handled the horses. She began to look forward to their evening conversations on the porch, where they would discuss books. Wyatt was surprisingly well-read for a rancher. Current events from the newspapers he brought from town, or simply share stories from their lives. For his part, Wyatt seemed equally interested in her company. He began inviting her to ride with him around the ranch, showing her his favorite spots: a hidden waterfall, a grove of ancient oak trees, a ridge overlooking the entire valley. On these rides, he seemed to open up more, losing some of the reserve he maintained around others. "My pa used to say this land has a spirit of its own," he told her one day as they sat by the waterfall, their horses grazing nearby. "That if you listen closely enough, it'll tell you what it needs." "And what does it need?" Sarah asked, entranced by the play of sunlight through the water. "Care, respect." Wyatt looked at her, his eyes reflecting the blue of the sky. "Same as people, I reckon." Sarah thought about how he had respected her enough to give her freedom when he could have claimed ownership. "You're a good man, Wyatt Forrester." He looked away, seemingly embarrassed by the compliment. "I just try to do what's right, Not always easy to know what that is, though. One evening in late summer, about 2 months after Sarah's arrival at the ranch, Abigail announced she was going to visit their aunt in Sacramento for a few weeks. "Are you sure that's necessary?" Wyatt asked, looking uncomfortable. "Harvest is coming up and we'll need all hands." Abigail gave him a knowing look. "Aunt Martha isn't getting any younger, and she's been asking me to visit for months. Besides, you and Sarah can manage just fine without me." There was a mischievous glint in her eye that made Sarah wonder if the visit was entirely about Aunt Martha. The morning of Abigail's departure, she pulled Sarah aside while Wyatt loaded her trunk onto the wagon. "Take care of my brother while I'm gone," she said, squeezing Sarah's hands. "He may seem all strong and silent, but he's got a tender heart underneath. Been hurt before, and he doesn't let people in easily." "I'll look after him," Sarah promised, touched by Abigail's concern. "And Sarah," Abigail's expression grew serious, "I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." "I haven't seen him look at anyone that way in a very long time." Before Sarah could respond, Wyatt called that the wagon was ready, and the moment passed. As they waved goodbye to Abigail, Sarah was acutely aware of Wyatt standing beside her, and the fact that for the next few weeks they would be alone together at the ranch, save for the 2 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. The first evening after Abigail's departure was awkward. Sarah prepared dinner as usual, but when they sat down to eat, the absence of Abigail's cheerful chatter left a silence that neither seemed to know how to fill. "This is delicious," Wyatt said after several minutes of quiet eating. "Thank you. It's your mother's recipe." "Abigail showed me how to make it." Another silence fell. "I should check on the new calf after dinner," Wyatt said eventually. "Would you like to come along? He's a feisty little thing." Sarah welcomed the invitation, glad for something to break the tension. The evening air was cool as they walked to the barn, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The calf, born just 3 days earlier, was indeed feisty, butting his head against Wyatt's leg as he checked the animal's health. "He seems to like you," Sarah observed, smiling at the calf's antics. "He's just hungry," Wyatt replied, but he was smiling too. "Here, would you like to feed him?" He offered her a bottle of milk. Sarah had never fed a calf before, but under Wyatt's guidance, she soon had the little creature suckling eagerly from the bottle she held. The simple joy of the moment, the warm barn, the soft sounds of animals settling for the night, the look of approval in Wyatt's eyes filled her with contentment. "You're a natural," he said softly. "Most city folk aren't so comfortable around farm animals." "I'm learning to love this life," she admitted, looking up at him. "It's so different from what I expected for myself, but there's something honest about it, something real." Their eyes met and held for a long moment, and Sarah felt something shift between them, as if an invisible barrier had begun to crumble. The next day, Wyatt took Sarah to help with the roundup of cattle that had strayed into the far pastures. It was hard work, but exhilarating. Wyatt had been teaching her to ride properly, and she was proud of how much she had improved. By midday, they had gathered most of the strays and driven them back toward the main herd. They stopped for lunch by a small creek, tying their horses to a nearby tree. Wyatt spread his coat on the ground for Sarah to sit on, a gesture of gentlemanly consideration that touched her. As they shared the simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit that Sarah had packed, Wyatt seemed to be wrestling with something he wanted to say. "Sarah," he began finally, his voice more hesitant than she had ever heard it, "I've been thinking about your situation." Her heart sank a little. Was he going to suggest it was time for her to move on? "You've mentioned that you're not sure about San Francisco anymore," he continued, "but I know you still want to teach." "Yes," she agreed cautiously. Well, I rode into town yesterday while you were helping Miguel with the laundry. Spoke to Mrs. Patterson, who runs the school in the valley. She mentioned they're looking for a second teacher with all the new families moving in. He looked at her hopefully. I told her about your qualifications, and she's interested in meeting you. It would mean you could stay in the area. Sarah was momentarily speechless. The thoughtfulness of his actions, the fact that he had gone out of his way to find an opportunity that aligned with her dreams, it overwhelmed her. Wyatt, I don't know what to say, thank you. Does that mean you'd consider it? Staying, I mean. There was something vulnerable in his expression now, something that made Sarah's heart beat faster. Yes, she said softly. I'd very much like to stay in the valley. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Good, that's good. They returned to their meal, but something had changed between them. The air seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. The next few days were filled with shared work and increasingly comfortable companionship. Sarah met with Mrs. Patterson and was offered the teaching position to start in the fall term. She returned to the ranch bursting with excitement to share the news with Wyatt. She found him in the barn, grooming his stallion. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her breath catch. I got the position, she announced, unable to contain her joy. In 2 strides, Wyatt was before her, and before she knew what was happening, he had swept her into an embrace, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. I knew you would. They'd be fools not to hire you. When he set her down, they were both laughing, their faces close. The laughter faded as they realized how near they were to each other, his hand still at her waist, hers on his shoulders. Sarah, Wyatt whispered, his eyes searching hers. Yes. She breathed, hardly daring to hope for what might come next, but a loud crash from outside broke the moment one of the ranch hands had dropped a load of tools. Wyatt stepped back, clearing his throat. We should celebrate, he said, his voice a touch rougher than usual. I'll make dinner tonight. It's only fair since you've been cooking most meals. Sarah tried to hide her disappointment at the interruption. I didn't know you could cook. There's a lot you don't know about me yet, he said with a small smile that held promise. Wyatt's idea of celebration turned out to include not just dinner, a surprisingly delicious stew that he claimed was his father's recipe, but also a bottle of good wine he had been saving for a special occasion, and most touchingly, a small cake he had purchased from the town baker. They ate on the porch, watching the stars come out. The wine loosened their tongues, and they found themselves sharing stories they hadn't before. Wyatt about his brief time panning for gold with his father, Sarah about her dreams of someday writing a book of her own. What would you write about? Wyatt asked, genuinely interested. Sarah took another sip of wine, feeling warm and content. Life, love, the way people find each other against all odds. Like us, Wyatt said softly, then looked startled as if he hadn't meant to say it aloud. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Like us, she agreed, holding his gaze steadily. The tension between them was palpable, a living thing that seemed to draw them closer. Wyatt leaned forward slightly, his eyes dropping to her lips, and Sarah knew with certainty that he was going to kiss her. The moment was shattered by the sound of hooves approaching rapidly. Wyatt was on his feet in an instant, hand moving to the pistol he kept at his side. Stay here, he told Sarah, his voice tense as he moved toward the steps. The rider came into view. It was Miguel, one of their ranch hands, looking agitated. Mr. Forrester, he called. Fire at the north pasture. Lightning strike must have started it, Wyatt swore under his breath. Round up the men, I'll get my horse. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Sarah insisted on helping, filling buckets from the well and loading them onto a wagon to be taken to the fire. She could see the orange glow in the distance, growing brighter as the night deepened. It was past midnight when Wyatt and the men returned, exhausted and smoke-stained but victorious. The fire had been contained before it could do major damage, though they had lost part of the north fence and a small storage shed. Sarah was waiting with hot coffee and food. Wyatt's face, when he saw her still awake and ready to tend to them, held a mixture of gratitude and something deeper that made her stomach flutter. After the men had eaten and gone to their quarters, Wyatt and Sarah were alone again. He looked dead on his feet, swaying slightly with exhaustion. "You should get some rest," she told him gently. He nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, he reached out and took her hand. "Thank you for waiting up, for helping, for being here." "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," she said honestly. For a moment she thought he might finally kiss her, despite his exhaustion, but he simply squeezed her hand and released it. "Good night, Sarah," he said softly. "Good night, Wyatt." As she lay in bed that night, Sarah realized with sudden clarity that she had fallen in love with Wyatt Forrester. The man who had bought her freedom had somehow captured her heart in return. The following days were busy with repairs to the fire damage, leaving little time for private conversations. But Sarah caught Wyatt watching her often, his eyes warm with an emotion she dared to hope matched her own. A week after the fire, a letter arrived from Abigail, saying she would be extending her stay with Aunt Martha for another 2 weeks. When Wyatt read this aloud at breakfast, Sarah thought she detected a hint of relief in his voice. That evening, Wyatt suggested they ride to the ridge to watch the sunset. It was becoming their special place, where they could talk freely away from the busyness of the ranch. As they sat side by side, watching the sky turn spectacular shades of orange and pink, Wyatt seemed unusually quiet, even for him. "Penny, for your thoughts," Sarah finally asked. Wyatt took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "I've been thinking about the day we met." Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. "When I saw you standing on that auction platform, crying but still holding your head high, I'd never seen such courage. I knew I had to help you, but I never expected." He trailed off, seeming to struggle with his words. "Never expected what?" Sarah prompted gently. "Never expected that saving you would end up saving me too," he finished, turning to face her fully. "Before you came, I was just existing, Sarah, going through the motions day after day, but now—" He reached out to take her hand. "Now I wake up looking forward to each day because I know you'll be in it." Sarah's heart soared at his words. "Wyatt, I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "We've only known each other a few months, and I don't want you to feel obligated because of what happened in Bodie. If you don't feel the same way, I understand. But I needed you to know that Sarah didn't let him finish. Acting on impulse and the feelings that had been building for weeks, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, Wyatt seemed too shocked to respond. Then his arms came around her, and he was kissing her back with a passion that took her breath away. His hands cradled her face as if she were precious, and Sarah felt tears of happiness prick at her eyes. When they finally pulled apart, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I've been wanting to do that since the night you got the teaching job," he confessed. Sarah smiled, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I've been wanting you to." "Sarah Miller," he said, his voice low and intense, "I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you." "And I'm falling in love with you, Wyatt Forrester," she replied. "The man who bought my freedom and gave me a new life." He kissed her again, more gently this time, as if sealing a promise between them. The sunset forgotten, they sat wrapped in each other's arms until the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The next 2 weeks passed in a sweet haze of newfound love. During the days, they worked side by side on the ranch, stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking, though the knowing smiles of the ranch hands suggested they weren't as discreet as they believed. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch talking for hours, learning each other's histories, dreams, and fears. Wyatt told her about his first love, a girl named Emily who had chosen another man over him 5 years ago, leaving him heartbroken and wary of opening himself up again. Sarah shared her fears about teaching, about not living up to her parents' legacy. They had both been educators themselves. "You'll be a wonderful teacher," Wyatt assured her, his arm around her shoulders as they watched fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "You have a way of explaining things that makes them clear. You've taught me so much already." "What have I taught you?" Sarah asked, curious. "That sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That taking a chance on love is worth the risk." The day before Abigail was due to return, Wyatt took Sarah on a picnic to the waterfall. He seemed nervous, checking and rechecking the picnic basket, adjusting his hat repeatedly as they rode. "Is everything all right?" Sarah asked as they spread the blanket by the water. "You seem distracted." "Just thinking," he replied, though he wouldn't meet her eyes directly. They ate the lunch Sarah had prepared, talking easily about the upcoming harvest and her preparations for the start of the school term. When they had finished, Wyatt suggested a walk around the pool at the base of the waterfall. As they reached the far side, he suddenly stopped and turned to face her. "Sarah, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart began to race at his serious tone. "Yes, these past months. They've been the happiest of my life. Meeting you, getting to know you, falling in love with you, it's changed everything for me." He took both her hands in his. "I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." To Sarah's astonishment, Wyatt dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Sarah Miller, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to her eyes as joy overwhelmed her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Wyatt, yes." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and passion she felt in her own heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slid it onto her finger. The simple gold band held a modest diamond that caught the sunlight filtering through the trees. "Pa gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for the woman who captured my heart the way Ma captured his." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, admiring how perfectly it fit. "I'll treasure it always." They returned to the ranch late that afternoon, both glowing with happiness. They had agreed to wait to share their news until Abigail returned the next day. Abigail's homecoming was a joyous affair. She hugged Sarah warmly, then stepped back and gave her brother a knowing look. "Well, something's different around here. You two look happier." Wyatt and Sarah exchanged glances and he nodded, giving Sarah permission to share their news. "Wyatt and I are engaged," Sarah announced, holding out her hand to show the ring. Abigail squealed with delight and embraced them both. "I knew it, I just knew it. Oh, I'm so happy for you both. You don't think it's too soon?" Sarah asked, still sometimes wondering if their whirlwind romance was moving too quickly. "Too soon?" Abigail laughed. "Sarah, the way my brother has been looking at you since the day he brought you here, it was never a question of if, only when. Besides, when it's right, it's right. Why wait?" The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. News of their engagement spread quickly through the valley, bringing well wishes from neighbors and friends. Sarah began her teaching job, finding joy in the bright faces of her students and the challenge of shaping young minds. Wyatt threw himself into the harvest, wanting to ensure the ranch was financially secure for their future together. They set the wedding date for October, when the harvest would be complete, and before the winter weather made travel difficult for guests. Abigail took charge of the preparations with enthusiasm, turning the simple ceremony Sarah and Wyatt had envisioned into a community celebration. The whole valley wants to see the handsome rancher wed to the pretty schoolteacher he rescued, she explained when Sarah expressed concern about the growing guest list. It's the most romantic thing that's happened around here in years. Despite the busyness of their separate responsibilities, Wyatt and Sarah made time for each other every day. Sometimes it was just a shared meal or a few quiet moments on the porch after dinner. But they guarded these times jealously, understanding that they were building the foundation for their life together. One evening in late September, about 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah returned from school to find Wyatt waiting for her with the wagon. "I have a surprise for you," he said, helping her up onto the seat. "It's not far." He drove to a spot about half a mile from the main ranch house, where a clearing in a grove of oak trees offered a beautiful view of the valley. As they approached, Sarah gasped. A small cabin stood in the clearing, newly built by the look of it. "Wyatt, what is this?" He helped her down from the wagon, looking pleased at her reaction. "I thought we might want a place of our own. Not that I don't love living with Abby, but a married couple should have some privacy." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly seeming unsure. "If you don't like it, we can stay at the main house. Or I can build something elsewhere." Sarah stopped his nervous rambling with a kiss. "It's perfect. Absolutely perfect." Relief washed over his face. "Would you like to see inside?" The cabin was simple but charming, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a small bedroom, and even a tiny room that Wyatt explained could be a nursery. "Someday, when we're ready." The furniture was a mixture of pieces Wyatt had made himself and items purchased in town. Everything was new and clean, waiting for them to make it their home. "I can't believe you did all this," Sarah said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Had some help from the boys and neighbors," Wyatt admitted. "Wanted it to be ready before the wedding. Do you really like it?" "I love it." She went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and looking up into his face. "And I love you, Wyatt Forrester, more than I ever thought possible." The day of their wedding dawned clear and crisp, the October air holding just a hint of the winter to come. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with an arch of autumn flowers erected in the yard for the occasion. Nearly everyone in the valley attended, eager to witness the culmination of what had become known locally as a true love story. Sarah wore a gown of ivory silk that Abigail had helped her select on a special trip to Sacramento. As she walked toward Wyatt, who waited for her beneath the arch looking handsome and slightly nervous in his best suit, she couldn't help but reflect on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. 3 months ago, she had stood on an auction platform, her future dark and terrifying. Now she walked toward a life filled with love and promise, toward the man who had not only purchased her freedom, but had given her his heart in exchange for hers. The ceremony was simple but moving. When it came time for their vows, Wyatt's voice rang out clear and steady. "Sarah Miller, on the day we met, I thought I was saving you. I didn't realize you were saving me right back. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of our life together. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your shelter in every storm. This is my solemn vow." Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she replied, "Wyatt Forrester, you gave me back my freedom and then you gave me your heart. I promise to love you faithfully and completely for all our days. I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings us, to share your joys and sorrows, and to build a life of love and purpose with you. This is my solemn vow." The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire valley. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Wyatt and Sarah danced beneath the stars, lost in each other's eyes. "Happy Mrs. Forrester," Wyatt murmured, holding her close as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she replied truthfully. Later that night, when the last guests had departed and they were alone in their new cabin, Sarah stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit valley that had become her home. Wyatt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. "What are you thinking about?" "How strange life's paths can be," she said, leaning back against him. "If that stagecoach hadn't been attacked, I would have gone to San Francisco, become a teacher there, and never known any of this existed. Never known you existed. Do you regret it?" He asked softly. "What happened, I mean?" Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "I regret the fear, the loss of my uncle, the cruelty of those men, but I can't regret the path that led me to you." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar on his cheekbone. "You were worth every step of the journey." Wyatt's eyes darkened with emotion, and he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and a lifetime of love ahead. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to the Forresters. Sarah continued teaching, beloved by her students and respected in the community. Wyatt expanded the ranch, breeding horses that became known throughout California for their quality and strength. Their family grew too. Their first child, a son they named James after Wyatt's father, arrived just over a year after their wedding. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Emily, named for Sarah's mother. Both children inherited their father's blue eyes and their mother's quiet determination. The little cabin in the oak grove expanded as their family did, with rooms added as needed, but it remained their sanctuary, filled with love and laughter. Abigail eventually married a shopkeeper from town, though she kept her share in the ranch and remained a constant presence in their lives. There were hard times too, a drought that nearly ruined them, an outbreak of fever that took little Emily to the brink of death before she recovered, the loss of Wyatt's beloved stallion in a violent thunderstorm. But through it all, Sarah and Wyatt faced each challenge together, their love a steady anchor in life's turbulent waters. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wyatt surprised Sarah with a trip to San Francisco, the city she had once been bound for as a frightened young woman alone in the world. "I wanted you to see it," he explained as they stood on a hill overlooking the bustling city and the magnificent bay beyond. "To know what you gave up for our life together." Sarah looked at the city with interest but no regret. "It's beautiful," she acknowledged. "But not as beautiful as our valley. Not as beautiful as the life we've built." Wyatt's arm tightened around her waist. "No regrets. None," she said firmly, turning to smile up at him. "How could I regret the greatest blessing of my life? The day you bought me at that auction was the day my real life began." "I'd do it again," he said quietly. "Pay any price asked. You were worth far more than $200, Sarah Forrester." "And you," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, "are worth everything to me." As they returned home to their ranch, their children, and the life they had created together, Sarah reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this happiness. From the darkest moment of her life had come the greatest joy, proof that sometimes, even in the wild and unpredictable West, love could transform tragedy into triumph, and strangers into soulmates. Years later, when their children were grown with families of their own, Sarah finally wrote the book she had dreamed of as a young woman. It was the story of a young woman sold at auction, and the cowboy who outbid everyone to set her free, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and a love that had spanned decades. When Wyatt read the finished manuscript, his eyes, still blue though now surrounded by lines of age, filled with tears. "You made me sound like some kind of hero," he said, shaking his head. "You were," Sarah replied simply. "You are." "I was just a man who couldn't stand to see an injustice," he countered. "A man lucky enough to find the love of his life in the most unexpected place." Sarah smiled, taking his weathered hand in hers. Their fingers, though now marked by age and years of work, still fit together perfectly. "Perhaps we're both right," she said softly. "Either way, it's our story, and I wouldn't change a single word." And as they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold just as it had on the day he proposed, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that the tears she had shed on that auction platform so many years ago had washed away her old life to make way for something far more precious, a love story written not in the pages of her book, but in the shared moments, large and small, of a lifetime together. In the end, she had been sold to the highest bidder, but what she had gained in return, freedom, family, and a love beyond price, had made it the best bargain of her life.